Trebia cost us 20,000 lives. We lost a consul and 15,000 soldiers at Trasimene.
And together, we will become immortal!
Wars in ancient times were not just about muscle power or sheer numbers. They involved some really twisted plans, psychological warfare, deception, and terrifying methods. These strategies were often brutal and ruthless, designed to demoralize and crush their enemies mentally and physically.
In order to ruin the land, the water, the ecosystems, the infrastructure, and the communities that allow an enemy to survive.
In this video, I will talk about some war strategies from different parts of the ancient world. So, number 1, the Trojan horse. Deception at its finest. We've all heard about the famous Trojan horse, but have you ever thought about how genius yet sinister this plan was? In the Trojan War, which took place around the 12th century BCE, the Greeks had been battling the city of Troy for 10 long years. When their strength and direct attacks failed, they resorted to a clever strategy. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse and left it outside the gates of Troy as a gift, pretending to surrender and sail away. Little did the Trojans know, the horse was filled with Greek soldiers hiding inside. Unbelievable, right? Like and subscribe right now, and you'll have amazing luck for the rest of the week. So the Trojans, believing they had won, brought the horse into their city as a trophy. When they slept that night, the Greek soldiers emerged from the horse, opened the city gates for the rest of their army, and destroyed Troy from the inside. This had to be one of the most deceptive war tactics ever used in the entire history. I'm actually blown away by their smart yet hideous strategy. Are you? Number 2, Hannibal's double envelopment at Cannae. In the year 216 BCE, the Battle of Cannae became a masterclass of strategy.
Thousands and thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, crammed together in a very small space.
Due to the brilliant Carthaginian general, Hannibal Barca. Hannibal knew that his forces had much less manpower, so he devised a plan that would outplay the much larger Roman army. What he did next was nothing short of genius. Hannibal attracted the Romans into the center of his forces, allowing them to think they were winning. But as the Romans advanced, his troops began to encircle them from the sides, forming what's known as a double envelopment. This tactic squeezed the Romans into a smaller and smaller area, leaving them with no room to navigate, and the Roman army was wiped out. The Romans lost over 50,000 soldiers that day, a defeat that haunted them for years. And the most interesting part, this battle is still studied in military academies worldwide as a prime example of using an enemy's aggression against them. Number 3, the Siege of Alesia, starving out the enemy. The Siege of Alesia, led by Julius Caesar in 52 BCE, was a brilliant example of how patience and long-term planning could win battles with minimal bloodshed.
I'll lead you, and together, we will become immortal!
Rather than launching a direct assault on the Gallic city of Alesia, Caesar decided to play the long game. He ordered the construction of 2 walls around the city, the first one to keep the defenders trapped inside, and the second one to keep reinforcements out. This approach was effective, yet horrific. The people inside were starved, cutting off all food supplies and demoralizing the population. Over time, the Gauls were weakened by hunger and hopelessness. Now just imagine, by cleverly using the environment and time as his weapons, Caesar didn't just defeat the enemy, he broke their spirit. The Siege of Alesia became a legendary example of how warfare is often more about psychological manipulation than direct conflict. Number 4, scorched earth tactics, destroying everything. Believe it or not, this is one of the darkest war strategies of all times. If you can't use it, make sure your enemy can't use it either. The exact dark logic behind the infamous scorched earth tactics used in ancient wars. This brutal strategy involves destroying everything in your path, burning crops, destroying villages, and poisoning water sources to deprive the enemy of resources. One of the most famous users of this tactic were the Mongols. During their conquests, they would eliminate entire regions, leaving behind nothing.
And herein lies the issue with the policy of scorched earth warfare. In order to ruin the land, the water, the ecosystems, the infrastructure, and the communities that allow an enemy to survive,
This was not just about physical destruction, it was about psychological warfare. By leaving behind nothing but misery, the Mongols sent a clear message to other cities: surrender or face complete annihilation. Scorched earth tactics didn't just hurt armies, they targeted civilian populations, not only creating famine and poverty among them, but also destroying an enemy's future ability to recover. Number 5. The Fabian strategy. While most war strategies are all about attacking the enemy head-on, sometimes the smartest way to win is by avoiding the battle altogether. That's exactly what Fabius Maximus did during the Second Punic War.
Trebia cost us 20,000 lives. We lost a consul and 15,000 soldiers at Trasimene.
After facing devastating defeats at the hands of the brilliant Carthaginian general Hannibal, the Romans were desperate for a solution. So Fabius came up with a plan that was simple, yet genius. Don't fight directly. Rather than risking his troops in battles that Hannibal was likely to win, Fabius turned to rebellious warfare. His soldiers harassed Hannibal's forces by cutting off supplies, launching sneak attacks, and generally making life miserable for the Carthaginians. He refused to meet Hannibal in any big, decisive battle. This earned him the nickname Cunctator, which means the delayer. Over the course of time, Fabius's strategy proved to be exactly what Rome needed: a tale of clever tricks. Without supplies or rest, Hannibal's army slowly weakened. It was a long, drawn-out fight, but Fabius's patience paid off. Number 6. The use of elephants in battle. Prepare to be amazed by listening to the power play of using elephants in war. Yes, you heard it right. Imagine standing on the battlefield, and suddenly, you see massive elephants coming towards you. War elephants, especially in ancient India, the Mediterranean, and North Africa, were used as living tanks. These animals were armored, their tusks sometimes fitted with blades, and they could charge into enemy lines, trampling soldiers and spreading chaos. One of the most famous examples is Hannibal's use of elephants during his campaign against Rome. He famously marched his elephants across the Alps, a feat that seemed impossible at the time. While many elephants didn't survive the harsh conditions, those that did terrified the Roman forces when they finally met on the battlefield. And wait, these elephants weren't just a physical force, they were also a psychological one. Their sheer size and power could break the morale of enemy soldiers before the battle even began. Even thinking about this particular scenario baffles my mind. What about you? Number 7. Psychological warfare. The power of fear. Ancient warfare wasn't just about physical confrontation, but also about getting inside the enemy's head. Psychological warfare played a huge role in many ancient battles. One of the most terrifying practitioners of this was Genghis Khan and his Mongol army. Before even reaching a city, the Mongols would spread horrific rumors about their brutality, convincing defenders that resistance was pointless. The idea was simple: if you could break the enemy's will to fight before the battle even started, you could win without even drawing a sword. The Mongols were masters at using fear to cause mass surrenders. Cities would often open their gates and submit rather than face the rumored horrors of a Mongol siege. The same tactics were used by Alexander the Great, who would exaggerate the size of his army and spread the word about his unbeatable reputation, causing enemies to think twice before engaging him. Fear became a powerful weapon, and sometimes the mere threat of violence was enough to secure victory. Clever? No. Number 8. Guerrilla warfare in ancient China. Let's unveil the hidden truth behind the success of small armies. Guerrilla warfare tactic. Ancient China saw a significant evolution in military tactics, especially in the use of guerrilla warfare. One of the most prominent examples comes from the legendary military strategist Sun Tzu, whose work, The Art of War, is still studied to this day. Sun Tzu advocated for indirect warfare, emphasizing the importance of mobility, surprise, and attacking when the enemy is unprepared. Contrary to traditional battles, in which armies lined up and engaged in open battle, guerrilla warfare involved hit-and-run attacks, traps, and sabotage. These tactics were particularly effective for smaller forces facing a larger, more powerful enemy. By avoiding direct confrontation and using the landscape to their advantage, guerrilla fighters could slowly weaken their opponents over time. This style of warfare was not only innovative, but incredibly effective. It emphasized the importance of flexibility and adaptability, two principles that have been carried forward into modern military strategy. Number 9. Roman testudo formation, the human tank. The Roman army was known for its discipline and organization, and one of the most mind-blowing formations they used was the testudo, also known as tortoise formation. In this particular tactic, Roman soldiers would lock their shields together to protect them from all sides, including overhead, resembling a tortoise shell. This formation was especially useful in siege warfare, where archers and defenders would rain arrows and projectiles down on the soldiers. The testudo allowed the Romans to move forward slowly without taking significant losses. It was basically the ancient version of a tank, with soldiers protected from all directions while still being able to move. But trust me, the testudo required immense discipline. Soldiers had to trust one another completely, knowing that if anyone broke the formation, the entire structure could collapse, leaving them vulnerable to attack. It was a powerful reminder that in war, unity and coordination are just as important as individual strength. Number 10. Hit and run tactics of the Parthians. Now here's the hidden strategy of the Parthians, an ancient empire located in what is now Iran. They were known for their incredible use of hit-and-run tactics, particularly with their cavalry. Parthian horse archers were some of the best in the ancient world, and they used their speed and agility to great effect. One of their most famous tactics was the Parthian shot. This involved their cavalry charging toward the enemy, firing arrows, and then quickly retreating. While retreating, the Parthians would turn in their saddles and fire backward at their pursuers, a move that caught many enemies off guard. This tactic was especially effective against slower, heavily armored infantry like the Romans, who were not accustomed to such mobile warfare. At the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE, the Parthians used these hit-and-run tactics to defeat a much larger Roman force. Number 11. The Assyrians' brutal psychological warfare. Think you know it all? Think again. Warfare secrets do not just end with physical strength and power tactics. There's so much more to it. The psychological tactics. The Assyrians were one of the most feared civilizations of the ancient world, and much of that fear was due to their brutal psychological warfare. Known for their cruelty, the Assyrians didn't just aim to defeat their enemies, they wanted to terrify them into submission. When the Assyrians attacked a city, they often made it clear what would happen if the defenders didn't surrender. They would flay captives alive, impale prisoners on stakes, and display the bodies in full view of the city. These gruesome acts were meant to break the will of the defenders and force them to surrender without a fight. Many cities, upon hearing of the Assyrians' approach, would surrender rather than risk facing their terrifying end. Number 12. Alexander the Great's use of phalanx formation. This is where it gets real. You all must have heard of Alexander the Great. He revolutionized ancient warfare with his use of the phalanx formation. The phalanx was a tightly packed unit of soldiers, each armed with a long spear called a sarissa. These spears, often up to 18 feet long, created a wall of deadly points that were almost impossible for the enemy to penetrate. Alexander's use of the phalanx was more effective because of his ability to adapt it to different territories and combine it with other forces, such as cavalry. Alexander's mastery of the phalanx allowed him to conquer much of the known world, from Greece to Egypt and beyond. His strategic brilliance showed that coordination, timing, and a well-disciplined army could overcome even the most difficult challenges on the battlefield. Number 13. Spartan agoge, training for war from birth. And just when you think this is it gets even more interesting. Only a few civilizations in history have been as dedicated to the art of war as Sparta. The Agoge was the Spartan education and training system, designed to create the perfect warrior. From the age of 7, Spartan boys were taken from their families and enrolled in this harsh training program where they were taught survival skills, combat techniques, and absolute loyalty to Sparta. The Agoge was all about endurance, discipline, and toughness. Boys were intentionally underfed so they would learn how to steal food, and those who got caught were punished, not for stealing, but for getting caught. The irony, by the time a Spartan boy became a man, he was an elite warrior, capable of fighting with unyielding discipline and strength. The Spartan phalanx was one of the most feared military formations in the ancient world, and it was their training that made them so effective. The dark side of the Agoge, of course, was the intense physical and emotional hardship the boys endured. But in a society where war was seen as the highest calling, this was considered not just acceptable, but necessary. Number 14. Carthaginian naval superiority with the Corvus. The Carthaginians were renowned for their naval power, and one of their most innovative contributions to naval warfare was the invention of the Corvus. This was a boarding device consisting of a large plank with a spike at the end, which allowed Carthaginian ships to latch onto enemy vessels and turn naval battles into close combat fights. Before the Corvus,
through the use of the Corvus, the fledgling Roman navy under Gaius Duilius won its first major engagement in 260 BC at the Battle of Mylae.
Naval warfare was mainly about maneuvering ships and hitting the enemy with the prow, but the Carthaginians, facing the powerful Roman navy during the Punic Wars, needed a way to increase their naval strength. The Corvus allowed their marines to board enemy ships and engage in hand-to-hand combat, where they often had the upper hand. While the Corvus was a brilliant innovation, it also had its drawbacks. The added weight made ships slower and more prone to capsizing in rough seas. But in the right conditions, the Corvus was a game-changer, allowing Carthage to dominate Mediterranean naval battles for years. Number 15. The Persian Immortals, psychological warfare through appearance. The Persian Immortals were the elite fighting force of the Achaemenid Empire, and they played a critical role in Persian military success. What set them apart wasn't just their combat skills, but their psychological impact on the battlefield. The Immortals were always kept at a constant strength of 10,000 men. If one fell, another would immediately take his place, making them seem invincible. Their uniforms were elaborate, and they marched in perfect unison, creating an aura of unstoppable power. For their enemies, facing the Immortals was a psychological challenge. The sight of an endless, disciplined force bearing down on them was enough to break the morale of many armies. The Immortals' reputation for being undefeatable was carefully cultivated by Persian kings to instill fear and hesitation in their enemies. Imagine, just by creating the illusion of invincibility, the Persians were able to win many battles before they even began. Number 16. The Greek fire, ancient weapon of mass destruction. Hold on to your seats as I tell you that one of the most terrifying weapons of the ancient world wasn't any huge metal equipment, it was Greek fire. This flammable weapon, used by the Byzantine Empire, was capable of burning on water, making it particularly devastating in naval battle. The exact composition of Greek fire remains a mystery to this day, but it was likely a combination of petroleum, sulfur, and other chemicals. When launched from ships or catapults, Greek fire would stick to enemy vessels and continue to burn, even on the surface of the sea. It was nearly impossible to extinguish, creating panic and chaos among enemy sailors. But that's not all. The psychological impact of Greek fire was just as devastating as its physical effects. Many fleets would surrender or flee rather than face the horror of this unstoppable weapon. Greek fire allowed the Byzantines to hold off much larger naval forces, giving them a significant advantage in defending their empire. Number 17. Psychological manipulation in the Battle of Thermopylae. The Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE is one of the most famous last stands in history, where King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, along with a few thousand Greek allies, held off the massive Persian army. But beyond the heroism, Thermopylae was a battle of psychological manipulation. Leonidas knew that his small force could never defeat the Persian army in open battle, so he chose the narrow mountain pass of Thermopylae.
Armed soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder. Their overlapping shields created an impenetrable wall, while their long spears reached out to strike enemies,
Where the Persians' numbers would be neutralized. The tight space meant that only a few Persians could fight at a time, effectively nullifying their advantage. But it didn't stop there. The psychological effect of the sight of the Spartans fighting to the death without fear, even in the face of overwhelming odds, had a profound impact on the Persian soldiers. It demoralized them, made them doubt their invincibility, and turned the Spartans into legendary heroes. Number 18. The Inca road system, logistics as a weapon. Have you ever thought about logistics being used as a weapon in war? Well, let me break it down for you. In warfare, logistics are often just as important as the fighting itself, but only a few civilizations understood this better than the Incas. One of the key reasons the Inca Empire was able to maintain control over such a vast area was their extensive road system, which stretched for thousands of miles across the rugged Andes Mountains. This network allowed the Incas to move their armies, supplies, and information quickly and efficiently, bypassing their enemies. It was a critical strategic advantage that enabled them to mobilize forces.
The Incas, so many of their great structures, Cusco and their royal highway, you ask them who built these, how did you build these? And they'll say, we didn't build these.
Rapidly in response to threats, even in the most remote areas of their empire. The Incas also used relay runners called casques, who could carry messages across long distances in a short amount of time. This allowed the emperor to stay informed about events happening in far-flung regions and issue orders without delay. Number 19. Persian cavalry, speed, and shock tactics. You will be amused to learn that the Persians perfected the use of shock tactics, using their cavalry to strike quickly and overwhelm their enemies before they even had a chance to react. Persian cavalry units were highly mobile, able to move across vast distances at speed. They would often engage in hit-and-run attacks, harassing enemy forces and weakening them before launching a full-scale assault. Their heavy cavalry, known as cataphracts, were armored from head to toe, riding equally armored horses. When these fearsome warriors charged, they could break through enemy lines with devastating force. But here's the surprise. It wasn't just their strength that made the Persian cavalry so effective. It was their tactical flexibility. They could adapt to different battle conditions, using light cavalry for scouting and battling and heavy cavalry for decisive charges. So interestingly enough, by striking before the enemy could even organize a defense, the Persians were able to win many battles before their opponents knew what hit them. Number 20. The art of poisoning. Wells and supplies. Poisoning wells and supplies was a cruel but effective tactic used in ancient warfare to weaken or eliminate an enemy without direct confrontation. This strategy involved contaminating water sources or food supplies with deadly poisons, often forcing the enemy to either surrender or retreat due to a lack of resources. This tactic was particularly effective during sieges, where the defending city's supplies were already limited. By poisoning the wells or rivers supplying the city, attackers could inflict mass casualties without even stepping onto the battlefield. The practice of poisoning wells has been documented in several ancient civilizations, including the Assyrians and Persians, who would leave behind disease-ridden corpses to infect water sources. In medieval times, this practice became more refined with the use of chemical and biological agents, such as hemlock or dead animals. Ironically, poisoning was seen as a particularly dishonorable form of warfare, often viewed as a violation of the unspoken rules of war. But the twist here is that in the brutal reality of ancient conflict, anything that gave an advantage was fair game. This tactic highlights the dark ingenuity of ancient warfare, When winning meant survival, even the most heinous methods were used to ensure victory. Number 21. Alexander's divide and conquer strategy. Remember where I told you about Alexander the Great's phalanx formation? That wasn't all that he did. This is where it gets real. Alexander was a master of the divide and conquer strategy, a tactic he used effectively throughout his campaigns to conquer larger enemies. By exploiting divisions within enemy ranks, whether due to political, ethnic, or cultural differences, Alexander was able to break down alliances and conquer territories with relatively little resistance. One of the most famous examples of this tactic was his campaign against the Persian Empire. Rather than fighting the entire Persian army at once, Alexander systematically attacked different parts of the empire, exploiting weaknesses and divisions among the Persian satraps. He offered some regions favorable terms in exchange for their loyalty, while crushing others who resisted. And yes, it worked very well for him. After all, we humans are greedy, and this greed can cost a lot at times. Number 22. Julius Caesar's use of engineering in warfare. I did talk about Julius Caesar's siege of Alesia previously, but that's not all. Julius Caesar was not only a brilliant general, but also a master of using engineering to gain the upper hand in warfare. He famously built a bridge over the Rhine River in just 10 days to launch an invasion of Germany, showcasing the Roman army's unparalleled ability to construct complex military infrastructure at lightning speed. Caesar's use of engineering wasn't just about force, it was about outdoing the enemy and using technology and innovation to gain a decisive advantage. His ability to combine military strategy with engineering skills made him achieve victories that seemed impossible. Number 23. The role of spies and intelligence in ancient warfare. Spies and intelligence gathering were crucial elements of warfare in the ancient world, allowing generals to gain inside information about their enemies' movements, weaknesses, and plan. One of the earliest documented examples of spy networks comes from ancient China, where military strategists like Sun Tzu emphasized the importance of spying in his famous work, The Art of War. Sun Tzu believed that knowing the enemy's strengths and weaknesses before engaging in battle was the key to victory. He advocated for the use of spies to infiltrate enemy ranks, gather intelligence, and even spread disinformation to confuse and demoralize the opponent. In the ancient Near East, the Assyrians and Persians also used spies to great effect, employing double agents to spread false information or assassinate key figures. The Romans took this a step further, developing complex intelligence networks to monitor their vast empire, using spies to gather information on both internal and external threats. That's all, guys. See you in the next video. Till then, like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos.